it's Justin Felder. You're probably still soaking in this Florida Gators national championship, if you will. I watched approximately 2.7 seconds of this title bout, which going into it in my pool, I mean, there's like 25, 30 people in this pool that I join every year. Shout out to Chad Armstrong here in Western New York. I was the only person who picked Houston. So I had every incentive to stay up. But I mean, that 9 o'clock tip, I just said, you know what? It's gonna crash early. We got kids. You don't know what in the hell is going to happen through the night with those sleep regressions. And I'm very glad that I missed the entirety of that game because I would have just been in for some, midnight heartache, 3:30 sunny wake up, and just miserable throughout the next day because I lost that pool. But it was a much different story for you as a Florida alum, I'm sure.
Well, I will say on behalf of your readers and your viewers that it's about time that you shifted the podcast and newsletter to a Gator basketball recap show, and I'm glad to be part of that. You let me know where you want to start if you want to dive right into recruiting for next year. Talk about your guy, Walter Clayton, pride of Iona, former Iona star. I don't know their mascot, but
The
yeah, fun,
Gales,
man.
right? The Gales.
Is it? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, man. But he's got a little New York connection. I know it's not exactly your way, but that's fine. But yeah, that was awesome. I'm so happy. That was great. It was an ugly game. They played it at Houston's pace. Uh, Weird fouls. It was choppy. It was ugly, but I'll take it, man. That is awesome. Three basketball titles. It's been a while, so we needed one.
You were at Florida, right there in Gainesville for the back-to-back titles. Is that right? Because we're the same age.
Yeah. I was there. I was in school. I graduated 2008, so I was there for two basketball titles and one football title. Then they won football again soon after I left. So I'm spoiled, and that has kept my mood positive for the last decade and a half. But now, we're ready for another one. But I think, that has kept me from getting too down on the teams because it's been rough
Yeah.
for a little while there. But this was a really fun team. It was, and like no top 100 recruits. Isn't that crazy? It's weird
Wow.
with the transfer portal, right? And they all came from really tiny schools: Iona, Florida Atlantic, Belmont, Washington State. Like that's where all those guys transferred from. It's just a different age of college basketball, but not a single top 100 recruit in the starters. Isn't that weird for the national champions?
I don't know a damn thing about NBA projections and what. I know he didn't shoot that well in the championship game, but man, Walter Clayton Jr. is fun to watch. I would want him on my team just jacking up a dozen threes a game. He's got some guts to him in those big time moments.
And like he was a big high school football recruit. That's the crazy thing was he was a
Yeah.
football recruit and had a lot of big attention and wanted to play basketball, which I think is pretty cool. Like he could have had some major college offers. He ends up going to Iona and then to Florida. So he's an interesting story and dude was fun to watch. And yeah, he like that closeout on the last play where he goes flying and forces the guy
Yeah.
to abandon ship there mid three-pointer. That was and and all year long it's been can he hold up on the defensive end? But yeah, he's a stud. I'm excited to see what he does in the NBA. Everybody has the Steph Curry comparisons, which is not fair to him.
It's like
But I
everybody
think he can
comparing
play.
quarterbacks to Mahomes, right? Like,
Right. That's ridiculous. But I think he can be I think he'd be a guy. I mean, a playmaker, ball handler. But yeah, it was a fun team. That was so exciting. I got to watch at the Gator Alumni Club party,
yeah.
relive the youth a little bit. But it was a good time. Appreciate you letting me talk Gators for a minute.
Oh, hey, you know what? That's what the people want. He reminds me of
Come on,
Fred Van
that's
Vliet. I could see Van Vliet and
a
Clayton.
good one. You know who I said, and I was our mutual friend Dan Koob. We were talking about comparisons. He is a Gator fan as well. Kemba, that's mine. Was kind of the run that Kemba went
Yeah.
on. Like not the volume scorer and probably a better 3-point shooter, but can get in the lane, kind of like a stocky, tough point guard too, not just shooting, can create. So that was my comparison. But Fred Van Vliet's a really good one. I totally agree. I think you're right.
But isn't that like the problem with college basketball in terms of how that game ended? Like I wanted to really defend, all right, college is more enjoyable to watch than the NBA. I've just been shitting on the NBA for the lack of a better verb most of this year because it's just all three pointers. It's just there's no mid range game anymore. It's a difficult product for me to watch for stretches. Joe Biscaglia here in town has been trying to pull me back in to the NBA experience. He claims that he's like, look at the Knicks, they do it all.
right.
But that's why it's hard for me to just turn that quarter and say college ball is better when a game ends like that. I mean, that is a JV level mistake, an up and down. I mean, you see
Oh,
that in sixth grade Ellicottville Central ball back in the day. An up and come on. I know it's a good closeout, but give me a break. It's
and
going
it's
to end
great.
like that? That slop?
And the crazy thing is, the same kind of thing happened in the Florida Auburn semifinal game in the Final Four, where a guy did go up. They thought better of it, bounced the ball, and then touched it, and it was a double dribble or whatever. So it's weird that
Exactly.
that happened
Right.
twice. But those were three great Final Four games. They're all close. They all had comebacks. I think I saw that it was the first 2 point or fewer championship game like margin since Duke Butler. Isn't that crazy? That hasn't happened in like 10
Which was
years, something like that.
Oh no, Duke
That was a
Butler
great game.
was a good game.
Right.
UConn Butler was trash. Like talk about
So
like
it's
a low scoring game. Like Duke Butler was an exciting, gritty, intense game. And then the next year that was oh my God. I remember watching that with my bro-in-law. That was a brutal game, that Butler UConn game.
Yeah, that Florida Houston but that's what Houston wanted to do. They wanted to play it at
Yeah.
60-58, and they dictated the tempo, you know? So I was impressed that Florida lost the like style battle so handily and still won the game. That's crazy because they wanted to play up and down.
So those who don't know, Justin Felder, Fox 5 down there in Atlanta, Georgia, executive producer and anchor. He covers the Falcons. He covers Georgia Bulldogs, football, basketball, the Masters. I mean, you're doing it all down there in the state of Georgia. And we worked together in Green Bay, Wisconsin for a number of years. A recurring guest. You were here just a year ago. We were both prognosticating Kirk Cousins to those Atlanta Falcons, which
Hey,
didn't end well. Didn't necessarily end well.
we're sitting at the combine talking about it at dinner.
Yeah. But you know what? We're bringing you back because we
We
want to
should.
talk all the above. We want to talk Michael Penix, Terry Fontenot, and the Falcons. I mean, they've literally tried just about everything at the most important position in sports. So even if you're not like a Falcons fan, I think this is a really interesting discussion to have because all of these GMs, all of these teams are trying to figure out how to nail this position. And they might just have the chance at doing one of the three things that Terry and the Falcons have tried. So we'll analyze that. You know, Bob McGinn's 41st annual draft series is now in its complete form at golongtd.com. It is a perfect time to subscribe if you're hanging out on that free list. He's got scouts across the country delivering the good, the bad, the ugly, everything on these prospects. I mean, each part is at least 4 or 5,000 words, so you'll get your money's worth there. And of course, there's a lot of Georgia players included,
Mhm.
and Justin has covered those Bulldogs at great length and detail. So we'll get into everything, but let's start. Let's start with Michael Penix. Wrote about him this week. You know, 3 games. I don't think we can rush to a judgment. It's hard to rush to a judgment on such a small sample size. I mean, just a couple years ago, Kenny Pickett is guts and glory, late game comebacks for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I took the bait. I was in on Kenny Pickett and the Pittsburgh Steelers. I liked the moxie. I thought that there was some kind of it factor there that he could raise his ceiling. Alas, he is traded to Philly and then traded to Cleveland. Let's not give up on old Kenny, though. Maybe it works out with the Browns. Um, I'm not going to compare Penix to Pickett, but I'm just saying 3 games isn't a lot.
It's a small
There's
sample size, yeah.
but there's a lot to love. I mean, I feel like what you can get excited about with Michael Penix is, this time of year we're all drawing conclusions on these quarterbacks, and I think he was pigeonholed as this guy who was injured a ton at Indiana, gets to Washington, and yeah, he put up these bonkers numbers, but by and large, there was skepticism around Penix because he had 3 wide receivers that were going to get drafted, including a top 10 pick in Roma Dunze. He didn't move, like compared to Jaden Daniels and even Caleb Williams. He was like Drew Bledsoe, like a stationary quarterback. He ran a great 40 at the combine, but his game wasn't very elastic. It's not like he was doing much outside of the pocket. So I think mentally he was kind of shoved into a tier below Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, even JJ McCarthy. Where if you're going to look at what he did and now in the situations he's in, to me he's that quarterback who can just take that big jump and become a rising star with where he's at in Atlanta. So I don't know. You covered him. You saw him at training camp, Justin Felder. You saw how he's interacting with Kirk Cousins. We talk about this being a bad situation for Kirk Cousins. I don't think Michael Penix had to have been that excited to waltz into this situation initially. I mean, he said all the right things. He's unbelievably mature. But let's start there. How did he handle getting drafted by the Atlanta Falcons and being told, like, you're a backup and this is like a 3-year plan? That was the plan initially. You're just going to be a backup for 2, 3 years.
Sounds like from everybody we talked to and from talking to Michael himself, that he handled it really well. Like you said, he said all the right things, and really that's our biggest window right into what he's thinking. And he came in from day one. I remember training camp last year saying, he's going to compete. He's going to go out there and put his best foot forward. And I think he also had the realistic expectation of they go out and sign Kirk Cousins to this mega contract. It's not like it was an open competition, right? But he said the right things. We saw very little of him in the preseason, and that was something that made a lot of fans here kind of raise an eyebrow. We saw him so little in the preseason, even though it was known that Kirk Cousins was going to be the starter out of the gate. So from what we saw, I think, drawing on training camp, you know how it is. It's tough to really draw conclusions from that. Obviously, the guy's got a monster arm, right? He makes these like, oh, whoa, throws, right? Whether it's just with power and with velocity or with touch. And also, he was making some, that wasn't so great, or throws that weren't as accurate, throws that it looked like he wasn't on the same page, which is what you'd expect. But again, it's hard to draw a lot of conclusions there. And you're also seeing Kirk Cousins, obviously also a new quarterback at the time, with a new starting cast around him, getting the vast majority of reps with the ones. So how much can you draw in terms of conclusions? But coming at the end of last year, and look, you hit the nail on the head. It's a small sample size. There's a lot to get excited about, though, from the very limited experience he had in terms of the poise, in terms of doing it on the road in tough environments. Remember that they didn't get the win, but you go to Washington, a team that had a gnarly defense a lot of the year, a coach that's gonna not make it easy on opposing quarterbacks, a defensive coaching staff, and was able to have poise there, keep them in the game. The way that Drake London was able to put up monster numbers at the end of last year. I know a lot of fantasy football folks are going to be dialing in on that and extrapolating that out for a guy like Drake London. And I think there's a lot to be excited about, but you got to see it over the course of a year. You got to see it now that opposing coaches are going to be able to have some tape on them and scout and put together game plans. So I think the Falcons are really excited about what they have. I think fans are really excited. And now we're going to have to see it. I'm interested to see how this offseason plays out, how training camp plays out, how much Penix does in the preseason, and then into the season. Because if he can keep that, like you said, making that jump, if he can keep that progression going, then they might have answered the question that's been lingering since Matt Ryan left this team. And if not, then like you said, they've tried a few different ways and they haven't found that solution yet. But they feel really good about it. And a lot of folks are just excited to see what he has in store in year two.
It is funny when you go back and watch like his Washington highlights. I mean, right, highlights are always going to be deceiving. But even if you were to sit down and watch an entire Washington game, I think you'd have the same conclusion. Now that we've kind of seen him in the pros and seen it work, now I just see like Randall Cunningham and the Lambeau Field monsoon in 1998 just taking a dagger and sticking it into my chest as a young Packers fan here in Western New York. Like it's just bomb after bomb after bomb, and it's accurate, right? And
the deep ball, yeah.
The deep ball accuracy and the touch, and it's in stride. This is what a West Coast scout really tried to put into my head when we talked like a week or two before the draft. He's like, everybody has Michael Penix all wrong. Like those receivers didn't make him. He made those receivers. I thought that was pretty telling. So what was the conviction that Terry Fontenot had on Penix? From what you remember, him speaking publicly right after the draft, because this was the story of the 2024 draft. I mean, you pay Kirk Cousins 100 guaranteed, and you need help at edge. Maybe you need another receiver. You could have literally done anything else to help your team win now. And I'm sure you heard the same things. I talked to somebody close to Kirk Cousins the day after that pick, and Kirk Cousins, who's a very mild-mannered individual, was quite pissed. Surprise, surprise, at this draft pick. But what was the conviction? So what did Terry Fontenot and the Falcons, love most about a 24-year-old Michael Penix, now he's going to turn 25 this May. Like, what made them pull the trigger at number 8 overall for that quarterback when they didn't necessarily, quote unquote, need a quarterback?
From what we're hearing, it was he won him over on the visit, and I mean we're hearing on the private visit. Oh, my dog is done with the podcast. He's a free subscriber.
Fondy, get in here,
We haven't
Fondy.
bumped we haven't bumped Fondy to the paid tier yet. I'm not giving him my login though. He has asked. Sorry, he just exited the podcasting studio here. From
Fondy wanted an edge, wanted Dallas Turner.
yeah, right, exactly. Exactly. So from what we've heard is it kind of keeps going back to that visit that they had up in Seattle, and the story that's been told a lot of times was Raheem Morris kind of getting in there playing nickel and seeing the ball whiz over his head. And this has been a front office and a decision making group, right, that has really felt like, hey, we're gonna make our decisions and they are not bound by the conventional wisdom. And you've written about this before, and I know you've had some great discussions with Terry Fontenot. They're not afraid to zag when everybody else is zigging, so to speak, right? And even if all the draft boards and rankings and things like that might have not had Michael Penix as high, they fell in love with the guy, whether it was character, whether it was the deep ball, whether it was the tape, and certainly that visit, and they went with their convictions. And I think you got to admire that about him, right? And again, you've written about this. You give a guard a whole lot of money, and Chris Lindstrom, not a position that a lot of teams are making their premier spot. You go out and invest heavily in a safety, where I thought this was great in Bob's pre-draft write-up about how a lot of teams are maybe devaluing that position, not investing as much in the safety spot. I thought that was a great insight from Bob's pre-draft segment. They're not afraid to go different directions and really lean into their convictions there. So whatever they saw, they fell in love with Michael Penix and leaned into it and took him when a lot of folks obviously weren't expecting it. I do have to say, check it out. The video is posted on Instagram, live television last year. I did predict that they would take Michael Penix Jr. I said in the 20s. I said they'd trade back up.
That's right.
It's on Instagram. I shouldn't have, pigeonholed myself there and saying that they'd do it in the 20s, because otherwise I would have been spot on. But I thought they'd address the quarterback spot, right? Because ultimately, remember, Kirk Cousins' best case scenario, like you said a minute ago, was a, 2-3 year solution, and you got to figure out quarterback long term eventually. So I thought they would take somebody, especially with a 5th-year option, to have waiting in the wings. We just didn't expect the wings to be so short.
I forgot about that. You're the one person on planet Earth who knew the Falcons were going to draft Michael Penix. So let's give it up to Justin. That's why we have you on the Go Along
I
pod
went
right
back
here.
to our we did at Fox 5 Atlanta, we did a pre-draft special, and we did a whole little segment where we ran a couple of the, not necessarily the super top tier quarterbacks we talked about. Gosh, who was it? It was, I think, Penix and Bo Nix we talked about there. And what do we know? Because both those guys ended up getting drafted a lot higher than we expected. But we kind of said, hey, here are a couple quarterbacks. If the Falcons want to get somebody in the end of the first round or the beginning of the second round, maybe Michael Penix or Bo Nix. What do you know? Both of them are gone fairly early in the first round. But I was just actually looking back at that yesterday. I was like, oh, that's pretty good analysis there and getting our
Yeah.
rundown together. I'm glad we had that.
And look, it hasn't been perfect for the GM there in Atlanta. Obviously, this has been a team kind of stuck in neutral in that 7-9 win range. Uh, but the fact that he's gotten these chances, he's been able to become a product of his experiences. And I think that you've got to give it up to Terry Fontenot, Raheem Morris, everybody involved with the selection of Michael Penix and that conviction to then bench Kirk Cousins and declare right then, like, the Penix era is here. It wasn't like this is a 1 week thing. We're jerking around Anthony Richardson and with Indy and Fleck. No, like, we're done with this quarterback. We're moving on to the other quarterback. They deserve credit for the balls to do that, because let's be honest. I mean, it'd been very easy for the GM, after paying Kirk Cousins all that money, making that investment, having the big press conference, to just think of that best case scenario and say, oh no, like, we're gonna plug Kirk Cousins into this thing and we're winning the Super Bowl and we're gonna go for it. You still have that skepticism maybe in the back of your brain, like this could go the other way. So then you leave yourself open to that scenario you just laid out, Justin, where you are blown away by a Michael Penix and Raheem Morris is in that nickel position and he sees the ball and he sees the velocity and he can feel it and he gets that feeling. And then when they both have that conviction, you do it and you don't think twice. Because I think a lot of GMs and a lot of coaches, they don't open their brain up to this possibility. I mean, and there's a relationship there. Raheem Morris got into this at West Palm, sitting there by him. He's like, "Look, I've known Kirk there since the Redskin days, where he's a coach with Washington and Kirk's the quarterback. They know their family. I mean, you could let that stuff kind of poison the decision making. It's a cutthroat business, and if you're not operating with a cutthroat mindset, your ass is going to get fired. You're going to lose a lot of games, and you're going to regret. I mean, if Michael Penix goes anywhere else and blows it up, imagine what's going through Raheem Morris's head, Terry Fontenot's head, Arthur Blank's head, when they think, "Oh my God, we loved this guy, and we took Dallas Turner." Sorry, I keep picking on Dallas Turner. Like, if you love him, take him. I think that's the lesson for all these teams, right? Like, go down swinging, go down with the quarterback you love.
And you know, on the flip side, again, I don't want to sound like I'm defending or advocating for what they did or not. And there's a lot of Monday morning general managing you can do. You can also make the case maybe they should have made the change sooner last year. Plenty of fans made that case. You can go any different direction, right? But to your point, you know, I think there is a lot of what you don't want to have happen. You mentioned the Anthony Richardson scenario as, you know, a fellow Florida Gator, is I think what they wanted to be clear about, what the vibe I got from the Falcons last year was, we're not going to flip flop, right? That they didn't want to have a situation where Michael Penix comes in game one. This didn't happen. Throws 3 picks and really struggles, and then it's, oh, are we gonna go back to Kirk? What are we gonna do? And I think that also works both ways, right? When Kirk Cousins was struggling midseason, I think the sense I got is they didn't want to make the change until they were making the change. They didn't want to. Well, we're gonna give Kirk one game off here and there. So it was a tightrope to walk. And again, there's plenty of Monday morning, you know, second guessing that you can do. But yeah, when they made the change, they made it with full conviction, and they've continued that. They've kept that up in the offseason as we go into kind of this Kirk Cousins. I think it was someone in the Athletic that said it was like an amicable standoff or an amiable standoff. I thought that, I don't know if that was Josh Kendall or somebody like that, the Falcons writer. Somebody had that funny turn of phrase.
Josh does an excellent job, by the way. He's a great guy.
He really is. That's why I don't want to take credit for that. It might have been somebody else from a different website. Anyway, as we're kind of in that nebulous zone right now, they've continued to stick with, hey, if Kirk's under contract, he's our backup right now. We're sticking with Michael Penix as the guy moving forward. So that's what I essentially, you know, I guess ultimately you have to do is make the decision, you know, with your chest and stick with it.
Trying to think of the analogy, right? It's like, you know, they're in this relationship with Kirk Cousins at the apartment, but she knows they moved on to somebody else, right? The side chick is now the main chick apparently for the Falcons, but they're not they don't want to just boot out like the old flame. I guess it's very weird. It's very strange right now, and I like. I mean, the thing is, I think everybody wants the same thing. Like the Falcons would love to get some. I don't even know if it's about getting draft capital in return. They want somebody to take some of this contract, somebody else pay these bills. And a team like Cleveland is probably sitting there like, we're not going to just pay millions and millions of dollars for your mistake. Like when we can maybe do X, Y, and Z, and they kind of cover their bases a little bit with the Kenny Pickett trade. But Cousins is obviously better. And maybe you plug him in there and you win a few more games, but then what in 2026? What in 2027? So it's strange. And Morris even said, like, we're not foolish enough to think he's going to be there at OTAs, something voluntary, ain't going to be there. But let me ask you this, Justin. Like, I thought this is always interesting in February and March, like the injuries. I do quote marks because I don't know, because the Falcons are quick to say he was cleared. Like in the lead up to that Week 11 game at Denver, like he was on the injury list for a couple days as a limited participant. and then he was a full participant, and then he's completely off the injury list, and then plays terribly. They move on to Penix. Now Cousins in his camp, and we're very player friendly here at Go Long. So if he's dealing with something, that could be very real, and you empathize for Kirk Cousins. He's talking about the right elbow injury, the right shoulder injury. He's off of the torn Achilles. To your knowledge, like, what was he dealing with, and how much did it affect Kirk Cousins? Because he looked great in that Tampa Thursday night game. He threw for 500 yards. There's a lot to love about the Atlanta Falcons through September and October. This thing was moving. What are they, 6-2, something like that? And then it all falls apart. All falls apart. Kirk Cousins looked completely washed up. What do we make of the elbow, shoulder, injury report, off torn Achilles, health situation for Kirk Cousins?
Ultimately, and it's a really unsatisfying answer, is I don't think we're all going to know because there's the only people that know are Kirk and the training staff, and the Falcons are not going to open up his medical file and detail, well, on this day the doctor said that. That's not going to happen, right? What it comes down to is this: all we can say is what we reported at the time and what we asked Kirk about, and he was honest about his health repeatedly throughout the year, including that week. I think it was our friend D. Orlando Ledbetter asked him, I think after that game, that next game where he was on the injury report, not the injury report, asked him about being on the injury report. And I believe Kirk's phrase was that it was a clerical error, right, of being put on the injury report. He kind of brushed it off, said, no, it's all fine. Which you understand as a competitor. You don't want to be the quarterback raising your hand saying, my elbow hurts. Please
Right.
don't hit me
Hit me
in the
here,
elbow.
please.
Yeah, just like please just stay away from it. I get that. But those two things are mutually exclusive. The clerical error and the I was actually hurt. One of those two, those don't line up. Okay, and it's fine to say, yeah, well, during the season, I wasn't going to advertise that. I get it. So I think ultimately and you know how it is, and NFL fans, I think, your readers know how it is. It's kind of that gray area where our main sports guy at Fox 5's DJ Shockley, former Falcons quarterback and Georgia quarterback, and I talked to him about this a lot. And what he basically said was, everyone is hurt, but not everyone is injured on the injury report. So at the end of the day, if you are hurt and hurting and getting treatment, that doesn't necessarily put you on the injury report. And as far as those are concerned, if you are taking your full allotment of practice reps, you are a full participant in practice. So I think there's a gray area, and who knows? If you're Kirk Cousins and you see, a rookie first round pick waiting in the wings, do you want to go to the team and say, hey, I could take a week or two off here and really get to 100% and worry about having a Wally Pipp scenario? We don't know. We don't know what was going through everybody's mind and how hurt and how much it affected Kirk. But you're right. That was a very clear line of demarcation from, I think it was the Saints game where he says he took a hard landing or a hard hit that affected his elbow between the early season, he's offensive player of the week, and the end of the season where it just looked different. But every single week we asked Kirk, we asked Raheem Morris and everybody, is he healthy? And I think a lot of us were all thinking Achilles, right? We were all thinking, is that the source of the issue? And I just because that's what he was coming off of. And all season long, yes, he's healthy. Yes, he's healthy. Yes, he's healthy. And then this comes up in the off season. So ultimately, I think it's in the eye of the beholder, and we're not going to really know the full story. So I think it's just a gray area, unfortunately. And maybe we get more clarity from Kirk down the line. But it's one we're not going to, I don't think, have a really satisfying answer on.
And you know what? I just pulled up his game log, Justin, and it's statistically the storyline would match up because I mean he took a nosedive. I really forgot that it was this ugly. I mean, it was they had beaten Dallas. They're feeling good. Then they lose to the Saints. That's the game you referenced. The next week is when they lose 38-6 to the Broncos. Throws a pick that game, no touchdowns. The week after that, they lose 17-13 to the Chargers. That was just total disaster. Four interceptions, no touchdowns. Then no touchdowns, two picks in that Vikings reunion game that they lose 42-21. And then it's ironically enough a game they win. That's the final straw for the Falcons. He's just 11 for 17, a buck 12, a touchdown, a pick against the lowly Raiders, and then they made the move. So yeah, I get it. You have to make the move when you made the move if you're the Falcons, but Kirk Cousins is thinking I'm a better quarterback. I mean, that's the way he put it, right? Like I didn't forget how to play quarterback. It's not something I just forgot how to do.
Yeah, and Tyler, I think you're right on all fronts. It's interesting. I think Kirk certainly has a case to be made there of how this whole thing went down. But I'll be interested to see how it plays out, right? And I think here's my question. You were at the owners' meetings in West Palm, my hometown. What's up? Hopefully, you got to see my folks. But the question I have is this, and you tell me the sense you got. When the Falcons first came out and said, yeah, Kirk Cousins our backup. He's going to be our backup. He's still on the roster. I feel like the response from around the league was, mm-hmm, sure he is. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sure he is your backup, right? And fair or unfair, I feel like that was kind of the sense I got. But now, as it's dragged on, it seems a little more realistic. I still don't know if it's going to happen that Kirk Cousins will be the opening day backup. But as this continues, I don't know. Are you getting the sense from talking to people that they're having a little different view on what the Falcons might be doing?
I take the Falcons at their word. I think
Okay.
in their mind, I think they would be okay with Kirk Cousins as a backup. But I think they also know that it's unrealistic. Like they know he ain't going to be at OTAs. I mean, he's made a lot of money. Money matters a lot to Kirk Cousins. Is he willing to take fines for missing training camp practices or games? I don't know. But I think it would get at that point, I think it would be so ugly that they would have to set him free. The thing is, like this game of musical chairs, as bad as the quarterback play is in the NFL, like a lot of teams have kind of made their decisions. There's really like Aaron Rodgers, like his only potential destination right now is Pittsburgh. That's it. So I guess it's just Cleveland. When we talked to Raheem Morris, it was like the Falcons beat writers, and then myself, and then a couple Browns beat writers.
One people, that's funny.
Trying to get a sense.
That's
So,
funny.
like, what are the Browns going to do at two? I mean, they're not going to take a quarterback there. They can't that high. But in the second round, like, I think I'd rather have Tyler Shuck than Kirk Cousins, or maybe have both. And
Have
if you're
both, right?
that would make sense. I think at some point though, like the human side of this takes over and they sever ties via release, via trade, eating whatever money they have to eat, just to do him right. Like Raheem Morris said several times over, they care about him as a person. They want to do right by him. It's kind of a standoff right now, but I think if it gets to that point, they would be willing to eat the money for their mistake, right? Arthur Blank is okay spending a lot of money. And that's say what you want about the Falcons and their ownership, like they will spend. Terry Fontenot, when we sat down at the combine last year, he had that bag of Skittles. He's like, if I tell my boss like this bag of Skittles that's worth X million dollars, it's gonna help us get a Super Bowl. Like he'll spend that money. So I don't think it's gonna be a matter of all right, this sucks. We got to pay out this money. They'll they'll move on. And the Michael Penix, because you don't want to do that to as mature as Michael Penix is, you don't want to put him in that situation either, where there's this dark cloud over him throughout training camp and into September.
I think you said it a few minutes ago. Everybody seems to kind of want the same thing, right? Kirk wants to go somewhere and be a starter. The Falcons, I don't want to speak for them, and they've said they're happy with Kirk Cousins being a backup. And hey, that's you feel pretty great about your backup quarterback, all other things aside. But I think the best case scenario out there where it works out okay for everybody, it would just kind of require a trade partner, and we don't know if that's going to happen just yet. But look, it's a big contract, but quarterbacks cost a lot of money. There are a lot of quarterbacks getting a lot of money. You look at the Kirk Cousins deal, and yeah, it's a lot of money, but if he's going to come in and produce for you, if you're Cleveland or whomever else, it's not a bad deal. The contracts keep going up, salary caps keep going up, but there's a lot of movement right now. And you go kind of back to that amicable truce, not standoff. We're just kind of floating right now. I think at this point it is early April. You got the draft coming up in what, 2.5 weeks. I think you get through the draft, and a lot of teams like Cleveland and Pittsburgh will have a lot more clarity on who will be on their roster come off season. And I think that's when decisions kind of get freed up to be made. I mean, it's April right now. It's early April, right before the draft. What's the incentive to do something right now? But yeah, if you're Cleveland and instead of that first round quarterback, all of a sudden you have somebody that you feel like might need a couple years, then it seems like a better scenario. And Kirk has the no trade in his contract, so he has to be on board. There are a lot of moving pieces. It seems like we're at a peaceful place floating along right now, and I think there is a solution on the horizon that would satisfy everybody. You just kind of got to get there, and you might need another team to play ball. And if that doesn't happen, if there isn't a trade partner, gosh, we'll see. You're right. You got OTAs first, then you got mandatory mini camp coming up in the offseason before training camp, and it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
And lastly on Cousins, I thought it was interesting. Myles Garrett, after he signed that big contract, I think he did a in-house team interview with Andrew Siciliano, who's now the play-by-play man. And Myles Garrett looked like a kid in the candy store when he was asked about the quarterback position by Andrew. Like, do you know? He's like, do you know who the quarterback's going to be here? And like, how does that factor in? And he was just glowing, excited. Yeah, I got a sense for who our quarterback's going to be. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not going to tell you who, but yeah, that has me really excited. It's like process of like who is that quarterback that has
Right.
Myles Garrett all excited?
Right.
Does Kirk Cousins really get you that jacked up? Maybe.
He played great at the beginning. Again, I don't know. Beginning of last year, player of the week, all these kind of things, he was playing great. And
Kirko
he's still,
chains.
right. Gosh, man, he's swag surfing coming off the field. It just all changed so fast. But look, I think, and I'll say this, I'm not sure how much you've interacted with Kirk, and obviously we're limited to, press conferences and interviews and things like that. Gotta, just from the local media perspective, give him a lot of credit. Was always terrific to deal with us. He was always a real professional, and that includes right after the decision was made, he came and answered, all the questions, stood there, didn't, walk off after 2 minutes, said that I didn't forget how to play quarterback. And that was a question I asked him about if he thought he could still be a starter, which is, I'm sure an unpleasant question for this guy who's got a lengthy back of the football card, so to speak. So give him a lot of credit. He's gotten a lot of criticism in the offseason, and fair enough, for talking about the injury and doing this and that. He's gotten a lot of criticism, and it's understandable. But he also, I think, handled it very well during the season, as well as you can. And you talk about Michael Penix doing and saying all the right things. You didn't see Kirk on the sideline pouting at the end of last year, throwing his helmet, sulking. He was in the meeting, on the sideline, sitting in there looking at the iPad. He was the first guy clapping and cheering Michael Penix as he came off the field. And I think that's not lost on the Falcons. I'm sure it's not lost on Michael Penix, who's a young guy looking up to this veteran. And I would think it's also not lost on other teams when they're considering, that kind of guy. So it's a fascinating situation that we're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Michael Penix Jr., Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. Again,
Oh yeah,
we
right.
throw that name in there. Your Florida
Could it
Gator,
be the year?
the
Right.
best
Tyler
offensive
Algier.
lineman in football, Chris Lindstrom. I mean,
Yeah.
you can get pretty excited about this Falcons offense. I've been guilty as charged 2 years ago, all in on building a bully right around Desmond Ritter. We're gonna punch you in the jaw. Guess what? You need the quarterback. Lesson learned. Every team needs a quarterback. I feel like there's a lot to love about this offense. The defense. I really want to hear what you think about this defense, which was lit up by Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers in that finale. But what's the ceiling for the 2025 Atlanta Falcons, Justin Felder?
Been saying this a lot, right, with the offense, and you've been saying this a lot, and give you a lot of credit. You've been on it for a long time. There is so much potential on this offense, and I think I wonder if that having that guy who can throw such an accurate, beautiful deep ball can really open things up. Because man, one of my big takeaways from last year was it seemed like every game Bijan Robinson had one of those like oh my gosh, like video game runs, right? You talk to his teammates, and number one, they're always impressed. And number two, it's, oh, he does this at practice all the time. Like this is just kind of what we've come to expect from him. So talk about a guy who can make that leap. It is the guy who can take that next step to really being a superstar in the league, because man, oh man, he can just do some special things, right? And if you see, and hey, you got another great running back there, Tyler Algier, as well. You have Drake London, who, if you extrapolate those numbers from Michael Penix's starts, could be one of the top, pass catchers in the league if he's able to. That's a big ask. Keep it up over a full season. And then you have Kyle Pitts, who's been a mystery, and when he makes these amazing plays, you can still see the unicorn that Terry Fontenot, and decided to draft so high in the draft. And I'm talking to the expert on tight ends right here. And then it hasn't had the consistency that they're looking for. Can he, in a huge season contract wise, really break out this year? So much potential on offense, and is the quarterback going to unlock it, right? So that's the big question. But I think they'll be exciting, and I think if Michael Penix can even be good and take even a little next step forward from what we saw at the end of last year, they should be a top 10 offense, just with the weapons they have. Chris Lindstrom, you got two established tackles. Now you have Caleb McGarry protecting the blind side. That's kind of interesting, being the right tackle protecting the blind side. And they'll have to replace a center after losing Drew Dahlman in free agency. Defense, I think, has a lot of questions. It's going to be real different without Grady Jarrett. He was a mainstay. He was as much a visible part of this team and leader of this team. Just being in Atlanta, this is the guy who's on billboards. I mean, he was an Atlanta guy, Rockdale County High School, Conyers, Georgia, face of the team, leader of the team, and that was one of those, man, it's a business decisions. I know Raheem Morris talked about it down in West Palm. That's going to be such a big change. You still have Jesse Bates back there. You still have AJ Terrell. There are some questions, and I think the biggest one is how much is that, we talked about Michael Penix as a second-year player, how much are those second-year guys on defense going to be able to step up and contribute? Ruko Rororo, former Clemson defensive lineman, had so much talent and potential and athleticism. Didn't play a ton last year. There's an opportunity there, man, on the defensive line without Grady Jarrett. Can he be counted on? Can he be an impact player? Braylon Trice, another guy, came out of Washington like Michael Penix, didn't play at all last year, coming off an ACL injury. They really like his potential. The other, in addition to the quarterback question, it's pass rush. Since the Super Bowl year, it's been pass rush. That's been the question over this franchise. And where is it going to come from? That is the huge question. Maybe it's a first-round pick. Maybe it's Braylon Trice, Arnold Ebiketie out of Penn State a couple years ago. He really came on strong at the end of last year. Those are the big questions. And can this defense be, what can they be? Can they get to middle of the pack in the NFL plus a really good offense? That's a winning formula, right? But there are some questions and there are some losses. Who's going to be at safety next to Jesse Bates? Do you bring back a Justin Simmons? There are a lot of questions on this defense. And I think it starts with how much can those guys, Rook, Brandon Dorlus, J.D. Bertrand, another Atlanta guy playing at inside linebacker, how much can those second-year guys step up? Because they just did not play a ton last year.
You nailed it, too. I think if they get to middle of the pack, that the offense will be – I'm not saying this is going to be the 99 Rams. I'm really excited about – Zach Robinson kind of pushing the buttons with Penix's deep ball accuracy, Bijan Robinson, and it all starts up front. I mean, it was great chatting with Chris Lindstrom at length last year for the pod at the site. I mean, the way his mind works in the run game, it is next level. Like, yeah, he can physically maul you, but there is an intellectual element to what he does that is special. I think that it's a reason why we're talking right here on the Atlanta Falcons. If they nail this draft, if they can get a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball, they've got a chance to get to that middle of the pack to win the NFC South. I like Tampa, but I don't know. Like, is Tampa maxed out? Like with what they're gonna be? I feel like Atlanta might have that other gear to leapfrog Tampa Bay and to be a team that maybe can even surprise in the playoffs. But is there a position, even in a player, throw a name out there? I mean, you know the college football scene. Like, who do you think can kind of get the defense to that middle of the pack tier?
Gosh, I think so it's pass rush, right? So that's been the big question is who can come in and get to the quarterback. The Falcons right now are picking at number 15. They only have 5 selections in this year's draft for a variety of reasons. They traded a pick away in the Matthew Judon trade. They had the
Oof.
Kirk Cousins, early contact thing last year where they forfeited a draft pick. So you only have 5 picks this year. So if you find somebody you love, do you have to go into the 26 draft if you really want to move up from 15 to 9 or to 10? If you want to, the guy that everybody in the state of Georgia, the Falcons UGA crossover fans are just losing it over would be a Jalen Walker, right? And talk about a guy who, is beloved by the folks in Athens, produced, won all kinds of awards, has the toughness, seems like he can be that modern edge guy who can play a lot of different positions, hand down, play in space. And then they have another guy, Georgia, there too as well, Michael Williams. Either of those two guys. There is a feeling among Falcons UGA crossover fans that the Falcons don't take enough Georgia players, which, okay, fine. They actually have had several that they've drafted over recent years, not in the first round, but they've had mid or late round picks that for a variety of reasons haven't worked out. Anyway, neither here nor there. But there is I don't want to say conspiracy theory, but there's consternation among those crossover fans that the Falcons don't draft UGA players high enough. And when you see what the Eagles did with basically an entire defense of UGA players, you kind of get it. Anyway, I think those are
That's
the two.
true.
I think those are the two
The
guys.
fans are right in this case, right? Like,
Well, yeah, there's a lot of teams around the league that are descending on Athens just to see what they have waiting in the wings there on defense. But I think those are the two guys that if the Falcons could find a way to get a Jalen Walker in here, they would be so excited about. And that's the question that's got to be solved is who is going to get to the quarterback, who's going to make life easier on AJ Terrell, who's going to cause some of those overthrows that Jesse Bates can grab and take back for a touchdown. That's the little gear that turns all the big gears, right? Is pass rush. And there were some times they were so low in the rankings for a lot of last year, and then they had spurts, and it looked so much better. But it's just getting that consistent pressure, and maybe it's not getting Micah Parsons, who's going to have 18 sacks a year, but they need several guys who are going to get 9, 10, 11. That can be a winning formula. So can they find one of those guys in the first round? Can they get one at 15? I don't know. If the mock drafts say that you might, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, Pierce out of Tennessee, those guys might be gone by that point. So it'll be interesting, but it's a tough year to ask to trade up if you're the Falcons with having so few draft picks to work with.
you're right. You'd have to dip into future picks, which I don't think they'd be afraid to. I mean, they're not really afraid to do anything, it seems. They'll think outside of the box.
If you got a guy you love, but then you're in a situation in 26 where if you're sitting at 15, are you willing to give up a future first rounder to get that guy to move up a handful of spots? You're hoping that by making that trade, you've turned that first rounder into the 24th, 25th, 28th overall pick instead of the 15th or a top 10 pick. So are you willing to make that bet? It's an interesting year. I'm the mock draft conservative. I trade down, stockpile picks, and I think that was a lot of conventional wisdom coming into the draft. When you think about it, especially only having 5 draft picks, was a lot of people, wow, this is the year to trade down, stockpile some. But now I've seen a lot more discussion and wondering of, well, could they even trade up this year to get that impact guy? I guess you'll have to wait and see how the board shakes out. If Shador Sanders and Jackson Dart somehow get in the top 10 and you push those pass rushers a little bit further down, maybe you feel great about sitting at 15 and waiting for whichever one of those guys is still there. But if those edge guys start going early, does that affect things? So I think they're gonna have a really interesting draft room. It'll be to be a fly on the wall or a bug in those cell phones would be interesting because they could go a lot of different directions.
Feels like we've been talking about pass rusher with the Atlanta Falcons.
It's the Super Bowl. Yeah.
I mean, really, Vic Beasley. I
Yeah.
remember that was one of my first stories at Bleacher Report, sitting down with him and all of the talent, the size, like cut from the football gods themselves, give you everything. We probably have talked about it on this podcast. I mean, you've had interactions with him as well. The juxtaposition, or I should say, like just the dichotomy of like somebody who is trained to kill the quarterback. Like that's what he does. The limpest of limpest dead fish handshakes I've ever experienced covering the NFL since 2007. I mean, and
You
soft
always come back to the
spoken.
handshake.
It's all
You
about the
very soft
handshake.
spoken.
I know,
Yeah,
I know.
I
But
know.
like, and I'm not. And it's not even a criticism because he is a curious individual, introspective. I mean, he's been through so much of it in his life. I can't imagine going through what he did. But it was so. I don't know. I mean, maybe that fired and burned quite like the Atlanta was thinking it would. I mean, he had the big Super Bowl season. He was dynamite, and then he just completely fell apart. I mean, declined. I think he was in the UFL last I checked. I don't know. You got to get to know these players as human beings. Beyond the film, like what makes them tick. Like, yeah, this pass rusher might be able to bend and torque and do all the things we hear all the draft nicks talk about. But this is why I love Bob's series. Is like these scouts, they try to get to know that person. Like, what is going to happen 2-3 years into this thing? How are they going to respond to adversity? I don't know who that player is, but boy, it sure sounds like Georgia has two of them. And if I was Terry Fontenot and I got to solve this issue, I'm doing everything I can to get a Jalen Walker. I mean, here's a few of the things the scouts told Bob is,
Mm.
quote, when you add the whole player up, I'd rather have this guy than Carter. Quick twitch, good speed, big time motor. If you don't like him, he's a tweener. If you like him, he's a hybrid, and you can use him as an outside linebacker and as a rusher. Another scout, he has top character off the field. He has that mentality, and I like the way he plays. This one says he doesn't produce. I mean, the scouts can be pretty harsh, but it seems like here's another one. He's a defensive coordinator's dream.
Mm.
A player probably worth parting draft capital for. You've got to get this right. It's been a problem in Atlanta for years and years and years, back to the 1 year they thought they solved it in Vic Beasley.
Yeah, I mean that's what you need, right? That's the dream. And I mean you talk about, so let's say, just imagine a hypothetical scenario, right, where you hit a home run on that pick, where whether it's, I don't know, look at like a Jared Verse last year. What, I don't remember what number he went in the first round, but he wasn't the first. He wasn't even, what was he, like the third pass rusher taken? Don't quote me on that, but he wasn't right at the top. He was kind of in the middle, and then he comes in and has a dynamite season, right? If you can get that and you can somehow find a premier pass rusher, whether it's trading up, whether it's just nailing that first round pick, it changes the look on this defense. And that's a lot to ask of a rookie to come in and be Micah Parsons and be Myles Garrett and be, 15, 18 sacks. But if you can even have a guy come in, consistently generate pressure, consistently get to the quarterback, I think it's going to unlock so many things on this defense. Because remember, they've got playmakers throughout that defense. You got Jesse Bates. You have Caden Ellis, right, who's great at the linebacker spot. You have A.J. Terrell, who can be as good as is out there at the cornerback spot. You have several guys. You have David Onyemata, who at his best is just a run stuffer inside. It's just going to make life miserable on interior defensive linemen. If you can get that guy who consistently is getting pressure, who's drawing attention and double teams and freeing things up for Arnold Ebiketie and for Braylon Trice, let's not forget about him. Maybe he comes in next year and really is dynamite, but you're coming off an ACL surgery, so you don't want to put expectations too high. If they get that right, it takes you from, man, this defense has a lot of questions, to, oh, all of a sudden they can be really good. You just somebody that can open things up for all those other playmakers. I'm talking myself into trading up now. We have our draft special coming up, and I got to defend my 1 year streak of getting it right. But I think, yeah, Jalen Walker is, you talk to anybody in Athens, and I think they really like all these guys coming out in the draft class. And I hate to just focus on Jalen Walker when you have Michael Williams, who is off the charts testing, was the everything recruit, played through injury all year. Give him credit for that. A lot of folks, knocking his production going down this last year, didn't meet expectations, but really played through a lot. Said at the combine he barely practiced all year long because he was playing through so much. So that's another guy who, maybe teams are going to see something in, might go a little higher than expected. You got Malachi Starks. Hey, Falcons could also use another safety to put back there. Another guy who, like Jalen Walker, is just going to be an interview all-star who's going to blow some teams away in the interview process. So I think the Falcons do not have to geographically look far for impact players on defense. If they can get one of those guys, it could change things. But again, it's the pass rush, man. That's the big question with this team. It has been since Vic Beasley, who was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate that year. I mean, he was everywhere. But then, yeah, you're
And
right.
here we are just trashing Vic Beasley. No, I liked him. I
The
liked
hell
him.
they're not in the Super Bowl without the year he had. I
That's right.
mean, they're just not. And he was okay. It was good the next year, but he couldn't match that Super Bowl year where he was in every discussion for Player of the Year, justifiably so. So that's the big question: is how do you answer that, and can that first round pick address that spot?
Yeah, Vic Beasley, year two, 15 and a half sacks, first team all pro, 16 quarterback, hit six forced fumbles. I mean, that team, that
Touchdown or
offense, that
two?
defense.
Did he
Yeah.
have a touchdown or
Yep.
two? Yeah,
He had a touchdown.
yeah,
And then down to five sacks, eight sacks, and then he never had a sack the rest of his career. Bounced around from there.
yeah.
You mentioned Malachi Starks. I love him in Buffalo. I think that he is everything the Bills need defensively. Just reading up the way the scouts describe him, I know that he gave up a couple big plays, and you can nitpick and you could say, well, what's the value of a safety? Do you take that safety in the first round? Hey, we saw it firsthand covering the Packers, right? They drafted, Demarius Randall high, transitioning him corner to safety. Even Clinton Dix, who had his moments, didn't. I guess you could say it didn't work out. I mean, he didn't get to that second contract. And when I think of Clinton Dix, I think of the 2-point play in Seattle more than anything, just losing the flight of the ball as Russell Wilson just throws it to the high heavens. It's hard to draft a safety in the first round, but I
Right.
don't know, man. I mean,
I'd want him on
I'm
my
watching this
team. I
Bills
mean,
defense, and they could use somebody back there who knows how to get everybody set, who's going to make some plays, who's a leader. You covered Malachi Starks. What can you tell us about him?
I think there are examples of safeties, making an impact too. It's a very different player playing a very different position, but one of the guys that had a big slide, what was it, 2 years ago now? How about like Brian Branch? How many teams are
Totally.
regretting not getting Brian Branch right now? I don't remember the exact, draft, but he was projected super high and
Kyle Hamilton
lower.
changed the Ravens defense, right? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah. All three guys, by the way, played high school football here. Brian Branch, Sandy Creek, Kyle Hamilton, Marist, Sean McVay School, I think Marist, and then
wow.
Malachi Starks, Jefferson High School, smaller town, the Dragons, your Dragons, Tyler. But yeah, Malachi Starks, you talk about a guy who's beloved in Athens, was a leader, flies around the field. I mean, you look at the incredible one of the plays of the season, one of the plays the last several years against Clemson, the one-handed twisting, just crazy interception that he had going down the sideline. Yeah, and put in some tough spots. The Alabama, all everything. Brian Williams making plays that where you see Malachi in the frame there. That's tough, but he wasn't alone in that. But I think a guy that, like you said, you'd want to have on your team. You'd want to be in the battles with in terms of what he brings and in terms of the leadership and the character. I think teams are going to fall in love with him. I have a hard time seeing him slide out of the first round, and a guy that they just gush about universally in Athens. Just a playmaker, and like you said, cerebral, is going to get guys set, but is also going to fly around and make some plays. But yeah, I thought Bob's newsletter article about the safety position, super interesting just to hear the way teams view that spot differently. If it can be the playmaking driver of the defense spot. But yeah, the talent and what he's going to bring to a team, I think justifies a first round pick. And he's a guy that I think teams and fans are going to fall in love with wherever he ends up.
All
He
right.
could be in Atlanta. It certainly could be. There are plenty of people here who would love to see him in Atlanta, and they've got, an opening at the safety spot right now alongside an all-pro caliber player in Jesse Bates. That certainly could happen. it would leave perhaps the biggest question of pass rush, but it would, you got to have two safeties in most defenses. So there is an opportunity there. So I think that could certainly be in play. Malachi Starks for the Falcons. That's something I know a lot of fans here would be very interested in.
Matter. I wouldn't have a problem with any team taking a safety at any point. Like Brian Branch. I mean, look at that Lions defense. They're down to skin and bones and picking up Jamal Adams and Miles Adams and David Long Jr., our guy here at Go Long, he should be on the team. He's a damn good player. But they're picking up the Northern Savages all season defensively, to quote Dan Campbell. But they were able to keep winning because of a guy like Brian Branch staying healthy. I'd take a safety if I was an NFL team and if I needed
And
one.
And Brian Branch, I guess, I'm certainly not a Lions expert, but I think he plays a lot of nickel, plays a lot towards the line. He's
Oh,
really like a
totally.
thumper. I'm not sure if you're going to ask Malachi Starks to do that, but I think is certainly athletic enough to play nickel. He has some experience playing on the outside as a corner. So if, we see week in, week out in the NFL, just how valuable the nickelback spot is. So if you have a guy who you're going to play, a bunch of snaps at safety that you can drop down into a nickelback spot, if you feel like that's Malachi Starks, that can even just increase his value. And he's probably playing the position differently than a Brian Branch would. But I think that's just, you talk about maybe teams see the safety position in declining importance, but the nickelback position is essentially a starter now. It's not the base defense that we grew up watching. Every team has, 5 defensive backs out there on most snaps, it seems like. So if you have a guy who can play that role as well, and who you feel like can handle as a young player learning 2 positions, that's incredible value.
Well, this was an incredible conversation with Justin Felder of Fox 5 Atlanta. Thank you so much for hanging out. I know you've got that guitar behind you. You probably got to get to practicing for those. He's very humble. Justin can play the hell out of that guitar. I tried to take lessons out there in Green Bay from your teacher, Forrest. Amazing guitar teacher. But I lasted like, I don't know, a year and a half. I could never turn that corner. It was very difficult to use that part of my brain. But man, you can croon.
Hey, I wouldn't go that far. I appreciate it, but no, it's great catching up as always. Thank you for indulging a little bit of Gator basketball talk. You want to have me back on talk about the transfer portal for Todd Golden and the bunch, where we're projecting Walter Clayton Jr. in the NBA anytime. I just, this is what your subscribers want.
It's what they
It's
want.
what
It's what
we
they
are
want.
asking for.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. That your sit down with Elijah Martin is gonna be fire. I can't wait to read it.
He is fun. I remember him at Florida Atlantic in the tournament, man. Yeah, he's
Oh,
electric.
he's great. That was a good guy. It was awesome.
The Hornets will draft them both and then continue to win 15 games a year, I'm sure.
Hornets. At least they're the Hornets.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Thanks
take
so
what
much,
you-
Justin. That was
Yeah, man.
awesome. Let's do it again.